So I want to start this out. This has one of the greatest. Now, there's a friend of mine who's a movie buff, not in the profession. He and I came up with this bit, which is called "Get Out of My Office," meaning that an idea comes in that's so absurd, or it's a movie that exists, and the only thing you can say is "Get out of my office." This has one of the greatest "Get out of my office" starts of any film I've seen in a long time. I'm going to tell you, it is two vaudevillians. Okay, who's going to play these vaudevillians? Elliott Gould and James Caan. Get out of my office.
It's like something out of movie 43,
I mean,
really, the premise, yeah.
You couldn't find two miscast. Now, they didn't do bad as Song and Dance. Now, having said that, they didn't do bad as Song and Dance Men. But I would never think of those two as Song and Dance Men. Never. In a million years.
Well, especially, you know, one of the things I love about this series that we're doing is it's a constant education for me on a lot of films that were sort of before my time, or, you know, just that I hadn't caught up on. So I mostly know James Caan from like serious roles. You know, I'm thinking about The Godfather, which came out a few years before this, and Diane Keaton shows up in this movie as well. We're talking about Harry and Walter Go to New York from 1976. Movie turns 45 this year. I didn't know anything about it existing. And so to see James
Caan. I thought
Caan,
it was 74.
I got 76.
Oh, okay.
But
a bicentennial film.
There you go. And definitely the Spirit of America or something, kind of a movie.
Yeah.
But to see him in this comedic role and really going for it was just so shocking that I looked up what the tomato meter had to say about this. This movie got savaged. It was a huge flop. James Caan has distanced himself from it. The Wikipedia, if you go to the reception section, like how did this movie do? How was it reviewed? It's just person after person, from film critics down to, I think, the director to the stars. They're all like, yes. I was never in that movie. What are you talking about?
Right. Well, Caan fired his agent after it. I mean, it's it's just, it was a calculated risk based on the fact that The Sting was a big film.
And I've never seen The Sting, so I have no context for that.
Well, I do, you know, The Sting was a 1930s con men picture that celebrated America during that time, and this did the same thing, except it was set a little earlier, I believe. When was this set?
1892.
Right, 1892. And The Sting was set in the 30s. So, so they thought they had another Sting. But as I've read also online, it's just like the script was the mangled editing. I guess the cut was too long, so they took out all the jokes, and it pretty much needed something to help it along. I don't know. What give me your impression. Well, let's talk about what the film's about. It's so odd.
It's about these two guys named Harry and Walter, and they go to New York. See, you're right. It opens up with this crazy vaudeville musical number of these two guys, Harry and Walter. They're singing a song about how their names are Harry and Walter. They're having trouble getting in and out of the different costumes. The audience is losing patience with them. It's clear that they're very passionate. They want to be big stars, and they think that they should be, but they really shouldn't at this point in the game. I think the song is called "Nobody's Perfect," and it's a great thesis statement for the movie. Right. So they get sent to jail for, you know, basically stealing money from the wallets of the marks in the audience, and they end up in prison at the exact same time as Michael Caine's character, Mr. Adam Worth,
who was a real dude.
Really?
Yes, I saw that. He was a notorious late 19th century thief who could have been the inspiration for Professor Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes series.
Wow.
That's a nice piece of trivia, huh?
Look, that just deepens my probably unreasonable affection for this. I loved this movie. And I wonder
I
if
didn't love it, but I liked it a lot too. You know, I'm
it's
glad we revealed that because I wasn't sure.
well, and that's fine. I mean, like, but while I was watching it, and even after when I was reading all the negative press, I thought I can understand why this movie was not successful and why people had no time
Oh
for it
yeah,
when it came out. But I feel like it's one of
absolutely.
those things that you can appreciate a lot more watching it today, particularly with some of the character portrayals and some of the messaging in it. I think it hits more now than it did before. Uh,
Absolutely. And I think if you got Elliott Gould and James Caan and Michael Caine in a room to screen this again, I think they would all three agree that this had something going for it. Now, maybe it needed, you know, a more continuity or something. I don't know. But I think all three of them would agree that their performances were really top drawer. That's what I was impressed with. It's a comedy, it's a musical, it's a heist film, and you have to combine all that and create this atmosphere, this universe of characters. And gosh darn it, they did it.
Yeah, and it's one of those weird situations. It's going to sound strange when I say this, but I know it's a comedy. I didn't laugh a whole lot, but I was
No,
charmed all the way through. And it
interesting.
reminded me of another Elliott Gould movie that would be made like 30 years later or 20 years later, Ocean's 11, the Ocean's 11 remake.
Ah,
You know,
yes, he must have delved into his is he Harry or Walter?
he
he was
was
Walter. He
Walter,
was Walter.
right? Playing. This was not an in joke, I'm sure, but it made that's the one thing that made me laugh. The fact that his character's name is Walter Hill,
Right,
the great
right,
the great filmmaker. Um,
right.
but it was one of those movies that you're saying building a world. Within the first 20 minutes, we're introduced to all of these characters, all these
Yeah.
situations. The plot is afoot, and it's still unveiling itself. But it gets right into it. You get like an hour's worth of content in the first 20 minutes, but
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like an exposition dump. It's just very exciting, kinetic, and moving along.
My problem was the front end of the movie. That's why I didn't absolutely love it. The heist and the back end were just great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really. But it kind of plotted, PLODDED. It plotted along. We get the bright little vaudeville number, and then suddenly they're in jail, and Adam Worth is in jail too. So they're all three together, and we don't really know why. Harry and Walter are serving him, and it turns out that as I was reading the summary on Wikipedia, oh, okay, he set this all up, Adam Worth, but I just think they spent too much time in that element, building things. Which prison actually work with nitroglycerin? I mean,
That's
you're going to have more escapes than any in history if you're giving the
well,
prisoners nitroglycerin.
well, I mean, I get the
I
feeling
knew they
that
need it for the plot, but you know what I'm saying.
sure, but I mean that didn't bother me because the idea that I got was this particular prison, given the people who run it and the
Right.
people who are not escaping, I just get the feeling that it's just like prison where like Harry, Walter, and Adam Worth are the first people of any notable intelligence to have been sentenced there. Everyone else is just like unspeakably dumb. You've and I loved the whole prison scene because we get a lot of information. We're introduced to
Wow.
Diane Keaton's reporter character from the Advocate newspaper. She's there to do an expose on Adam Worth, and I love that it reminded sort of the scene in Goodfellas where you've got the mob bosses all go to jail, but it's like they've got this giant cell and they've got like a kitchen in there and they're just making food and playing cards for 10 years. He's got that whole what was I wrote this down. Worth is he's a really rich guy. He's a criminal, but he also paints himself as a man of the people. He's handing everyone like $100 bills. He's like kissing babies and kissing women. But then you get him in prison, and before he has the big blow up where he reveals his true like dark nature. I mean, this is Michael Caine, so he's charming as hell. But he says, if someone asks him how he's doing, he says, "My silver lobster forks are gone. The mold on the walls is destroying my draperies, and I haven't bathed in truly hot water since I arrived here. The epitome of first world problems, but it's just said with such sincerity. Like, this guy just does not quite get it. But he's got this beautiful plan to break into a bank vault using blueprints that he paid for someone else to steal. Right. He posts these up on like the back of a painting that's in his cell, and he's going to plan his robbery there. Harry and Walter take advantage of the fact that this newspaper reporter brings a camera in. They screw something up. I think they spill champagne on Adam or something like that. Everybody leaves the other room. Harry and Walter get this idea to take a picture of the blueprints so that they could somehow get out and make something of these bank vault plans. Of course, the flash sets the draperies on fire, and it's a whole big thing. Eventually, because there's a lot of
very cartoonish.
Very much so. It's like this whole thing is like a Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck cartoon. But the long and short of it is, they make their way back to New York from Massachusetts. I guess this is where they're sentenced. They escape because Harry is put in charge. Yeah, in the quarry, making nitroglycerin. He gets out, but then they decide that they're going to try and pull off this vault heist. But Adam Worth also gets out, and he decides he wants to plan this bank heist. Right. And so one is coming at the vault from the ceiling, and the other is burrowing up from the basement. And there's this opera or this theater performance going on in the middle, just completely madcap 30 minutes at the end. Not the very end, which we can talk about, which is one of the darkest, most disturbing endings of a movie I've seen in a long time. But yeah, I was in for all of it. And I was going to say, it's a comedy. I didn't laugh a whole lot, but I was more invested in the mechanics of the story. And I was thinking, we don't get movies like this anymore. No. Because New York and Massachusetts, they look period. Everything is convincing. The costumes are incredible. Yeah. They're just pouring all this money into it to go for it. And it's not a comic book movie or based on some other property. It's just this movie that nobody knew about. They took a chance. It bombed. But damn it, I'm so glad it got made.
Well, it's funny. One of the big problems, I think, with it was Elliott Gould's character. Now, Elliott Gould had established himself as sort of a outlier, MASH and The Long Goodbye and Bob and Ted and Carol and Alice. I mean, he played kind of edgy, outside the box characters. Now here, he's playing sort of, would he be called the straight man or the foil or whatever? I don't know my theater terms that well, but he just couldn't pull it off. He couldn't pull off the dumb, naive partner to Harry's more larcenous, side. Jimmy Caan, he did great. That's a Jimmy Caan role. But it wasn't an Elliott Gould role. So
see, I don't have context for Elliott Gould.
Okay.
So when I'm watching him, I thought it was, you're right. But he's not playing strictly the kind of naive character archetype that we've seen in movies before. I like what he's doing with this part because it is a bit more complex. He's not an idiot. He's more of an innocent, but he's pretty much just a guy that is committed to show business. And he's partnered with a guy who is about as talented as he is. They get along. They share the same vision of greatness. But James Caan's Harry is just a straight up thief. And I think that's what gets them into a lot of trouble. When Harry pickpockets the one guy in their show that gets them arrested, I feel like Walter is he's indignant and he's shouting out like, I can't believe you did this again. Like, stop stealing from people. We're supposed to be making it. But then Harry's like, we're not making it. That's why we have to steal from people.
I just, again, the loser aspect of a very low key Elliott Gould, he's a lot brighter and more with it. I don't know. Caan did a better job playing a vaudevillian and an 1890s guy than Elliott Gould did. That's all I have to say about that. But I love the heist and the race to the heist, because that really is when the film picked up for me. And it actually had some things in it really going well for it. I'll mention this on, there was the actor, I believe his name is Jack Gilpin, or let me make sure, because he used to be a pitch man. Gosh darn it. Jack Guilford. Jack Guilford played Misha. He was one of the reporters on the newspaper. And one of the things that they didn't really mention, but became apparent as it went on, is that the Advocate was an anarchist newspaper. It was against the system type, rag that wanted to feed the poor, yeah, but they also wanted to bring down the government. So
yeah, and that's the expose on Adam Worth for sure.
Right. And so when they break into the actual vault to take the money, they have more expertise because of their anarchy than Worth has because of his celebrity, which I loved. And I also loved the fact that Misha, Jack Guilford, dressed up as Trotsky, and frickin' Diane Keaton was Emma Goldman, who she played in Reds 6 years later. I was like, oh my God, did anybody else catch this? Because they were doing a take on anarchists. And so Trotsky and Emma Goldman. That's how they were dressed. It was a very odd, remember they were dressed so oddly at the heist itself?
Well, and that's what is interesting is this movie, one of the coolest scenes, I think, is, Worth is at his club. And in the back room, they're planning to do a demonstration of this super safe that they've got the guy who's like the safe breaker who's going to show this den of criminals how this whole thing works. It's a demonstration. Harry and Walter and what was her name? Miss Chestnut, played by Diane Keaton. They kind of they find their way back into this room. I can't remember exactly the circumstances. I watched this at like 4 a.m, so some of it's a little fuzzy. But they get back there, and Worth is like, okay, well, we were going to demonstrate this, but since you've got this super plan, you're expert safe crackers, why don't you show us how to get into the safe? And as a little bit of incentive, he throws the safe open and then forces Walter to get in. He is the innocent in this case. So you've got this blustery con man played by James Caan. He's now got to figure out a way to get his friend out of it. He ends up running. He's got 6. The safe cracker guy's like, there's only 20 minutes of oxygen in there. And then Worth, in his inimitable Michael Caine, says, it's 16 minutes. We tried it out this afternoon with the chickens. He's just so evil and deliciously enjoying this kind of dual personality. And he's so hubristic and caught up with himself. Part of the reason he, screws up so much is because he doesn't think he can be brought down. So Walter or Harry runs back, gets the photograph from the camera that he had been developed, with the newspaper to show the blueprints to give back to Worth because he's all frustrated because these idiots, blew up his plans. And then they let Walter out of the vault and he's, gasping for breath. But that's a nice kind of a low key intensity scene. I don't mind the comedy of James Caan running back and coming back all sweaty and is like, oh, it's awfully humid for this time of year. I just like the idea of, it was almost like something out of the Dark Knight, something the Joker would do. Be like, okay, you're going to try this stuff here. I'm going to shove your friend in the vault and see what you do.
Well, the one thing that you mentioned before that I absolutely agree is I thought the movie was charming. I just found out that Keaton was only 30 years old when it was released.
Wow.
I mean, she looks like she's 20. I mean, she looks so young, but yet she was doing an adult role in a sense. And it was just an oddball piece of casting for her. You forget that before she met up with Woody Allen, that she had a career and that she was taking, famously, she played Kay in The Godfather. But now, okay, I've done The Godfather. What's next? Well, Harry and Walter Go to New York is next, starring the same guy who was in The Godfather. A lot of Godfather connections, of course, Jimmy Caan and Diane Keaton and Carmine Coppola, who is Francis Ford's father, who was a conductor, and he played the conductor in the opera scene.
Okay.
And that was
Nice.
the only film he ever appeared in that had nothing to do with FFC. So,
Well, and as far as Keaton goes, and her character, and you mentioned the costume, the drastic costume change at the end. It was after that scene with Walter in the vault that Ms. Chestnut goes from being a reporter at a revolutionary newspaper to taking on the idea of becoming a full-blown revolutionary. She's like, look, these guys want to steal this money just so they can, continue their lavish lifestyle and their lobster lunches. We're going to steal it and, rob from the rich to steal from the poor. And she gets this real fire in her. And before you know it, the cast explodes because now we meet pretty much all the people from the newspaper who are all anarchists and like experts in digging tunnels and making explosives and somehow procuring bicycle pumps. It's a great turn of character because she's convincing, I think, in both roles. And it's kind of scary to watch her, the character she becomes. And then to see the third turn at the very end, it kind of broke my heart.
Well, I think it was unexplained, and I don't want to spoil it, but I know what you're talking about, and it bothered me too.
It didn't bother me. It was disturbing, but I was glad that they went there because I think it's I don't want to spoil it either, but I will say the idea of because we see it in our two main characters as well, the idea that money and power can corrupt anyone. Right.
Absolutely. And that's pretty much the theme of the movie, I guess. The cinematography was from Laszlo Kovacs, who had done Easy Rider and 5 Easy Pieces, and went on to do a number of really, bold-faced films. So, it looked good. But again, the first half of the film kind of brought it down. I mean, I was doing the same thing. I was watching it late night. I was like, it just was automatically putting me to sleep. But then I got up the next morning and watched the second half. And I said, hey, much better movie. In fact, by the end, I was like, yes.
I don't know if you would have the impetus to do this or the time, but maybe go back and watch that first half again when you're not tired. Because that happens to me all the time. I'll start watching a movie late at night. I'll be like, this is terrible. And then I'll get up and I'll either finish it or I'll even start from the beginning if I have the time. And I'm like, that was just lack of sleep. That was grumpy Ian.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, we've talked about this before, but when you're reviewing films, your mood the day you see the film has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
That's why it's interesting to me that why would you like this film, or why wouldn't you like this film? Well, it just happened to be in the moment, So what else was I going to say? But yeah, there's a lot of mood in, and we've watched so much at home this year. I mean, that really, I think that's has an influence. I watched on my parents' very huge, like 60 or 80 inch screen, so it made it a little better. But still, that movie would look good on a big screen. And I don't think it'll ever be revived to become. I don't think Music Box is going to show Harry and Walter go to New York, unless they're doing an odd 70s perspective, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a shame too. I know there's a Blu-ray out of it, and because I rented this from Amazon, and
so did I.
I think it's literally a VHS transfer because it's got like the FBI warning and the anti-piracy thing, and then it goes into the movie. It's so grainy and just off. It's not like HD, but I did see it was Vinegar Syndrome or someplace, I don't know if it was them, put out a Blu-ray of it. It's like $30, but I would like to see if it's cleaned up. I know there's a commentary and stuff on it too, which would be interesting to hear. Yeah,
it would be. The cast, besides the main players, is almost there's so many familiar faces. Besides Jack Gilford, who was a big pitch man in the 70s, you have Carol Kane, Burt Young from Rocky, the same year he did Rocky.
Yeah, he was the warden, yeah.
Ted freaking Cassidy from the Addams Family, Lurch, was in this movie.
I forgot to look that up afterwards. I'm like, is that freaking Lurch? Oh, because I didn't recognize him except from his height. Yeah.
At first, I thought he was Jaws.
Oh, Richard Kiel.
Yes, at first I thought he was Richard Kiel because Kiel showed up in a lot of bizarre roles too. But then I said, no, I think that's Lurch, and it was. And Michael Conrad, who went on to Hill Street Blues, that was his most famous role, but he was in it too. He played the Irish cop.
Okay.
I don't remember his place in the universe of the film, but he was on the law enforcement side. Of course, Charles Durning, who played the same role in every movie he's ever played. He plays the hapless bureaucrat who gets bamboozled at the end because of his own weakness.
Well, and I got to say, that was something about the way this movie was shot really drew attention to his character's sleaziness, because he gets some close-ups where he's it's usually when he's trying to seduce a woman or his version of seduction, because he's a complete pig, but he's just sweaty. The hairs on his face are kind of scraggly in all the wrong places. He just looks like scum. I was happy to see George Gaines from Police Academy show up as the actor playing the prince in this play that Harry and Walter take over at the very end. That was
Hello,
fun.
Punky.
Yes.
And of course, he was in Tootsie in that great role as the soap opera doctor. He was a horrible actor, and
I've never seen Tootsie.
Oh, dude!
I know.
That's one of the top comedies of the past 40 years.
We got to check that off the list at some point, because that's every time someone mentions Tootsie, I'm like, I've never seen Tootsie. I got to watch this movie.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And then I interviewed this year Dennis Dugan, because he directed a really, really not horrible movie, but bad. Didn't do anything. And he if I had known if I'd seen Harry and Walter before, I definitely would have asked him about Harry and Walter. He had a bigger role too. He was the photographer that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And he fascinates me because he had that string of character parts in very prominent movies. Smile, remember, he was in Smile as well. And then, did Richie Brockerman and then became a director. It's pretty interesting, spotty career for old Mr. DD. So, Leslie Ann Warren too, who on Wikipedia said she couldn't get a job for a year after making the film.
Yeah, it is unfortunate how the stink of a movie can, I don't know how applicable that is now, but certainly back in the day, just you're associated with that. By the way, people were comparing this movie to The Sting. I wonder if there were any critic headlines calling it The Stink.
Yeah. You should have been writing headlines in the back in the day.
I would have had to have been writing them from the womb, because I wasn't born yet in 76.
And I was 16. But, and this whole thing started because I did a pun on Harry and Walter Go to New York with an interview subject that I was doing. And I go, I've never seen that movie. He goes, unfortunately, I have. So he was not in the, I'm going to write him and say, hey, it wasn't too bad in the light of the perspective of a few years. And a lot of times, when you go back to these old movies, like when I was, they occurred when I was a kid, I get a kick out of seeing all these people who are young, who I've seen grow old with me, suddenly young again, and doing a kind of weird Sting ripoff. It's kind of fun. Caine was at the peak of his powers. Jimmy Caan at the peak of his powers. Elliott Gould at the peak of his powers. All three of those guys were octane heavy then. They were big.
Well, with Michael Caine, I know I have not seen a lot of his earlier work. So for someone whose knowledge of him is largely formed around the Batman movies, to see him as not the old Butler, but to see him as this charming, handsome, charismatic, evil guy, I love this. I don't know how much of this perspective I would have been able to maintain if I had been of movie reviewing age when the film comes out. I would be like, oh, this is just a big misfire with a bunch of people who should know better. But as someone who, again, grew up without a lot of context, it's like discovering these actors in this really cool, strange movie that reminded me of, like I said, kind of a throwback to Ocean's 11 and some other films.
It's a classic heist film. I mean, you get your gang together, and are you a Rick and Morty fan?
No, I've never seen it. I've heard
Okay. Okay.
a lot of people recommended it to me though.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, they have a whole episode in season 4 about the heist, getting a gang together for a heist. And since it's all scientific, it starts to fold into the universe. It's very funny, the heist universe and getting a gang together. But they have the classic getting the gang together. You didn't see it on Adam Worth's side, but you certainly saw it on the Advocate side. They basically were using the skills that they learned to survive and be journalists and applying it to a heist. I mean, when they figured out how to blow the door, I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's what I'm saying. It's so picked up. And then suddenly he looks like Trotsky and she looks like Emma Goldman. I said, this is like high level stuff going on right now.
Yeah.
Mark Rydell was the director who has done a number of, again, bold-faced films, but he wanted to forget this one. Because the studio took it out of his hands and recut it. So it was what, 2 hours and change? So
it was 151.
Okay, all right. Well, most likely because like The Sting was over 2 hours. I think it was 2.5 hours. Most likely Harry and Walter came in at about the same time because like The Sting, they had a little complexity going on. And it just didn't work.
Yeah.
I need a half hour taken out of this. Oh, can you imagine? Because there was a lot of choppiness in it. You could tell it was edited. I could tell it was edited big time. I think they kept a lot of the last part in, but the first half with the prison, there was some cutting. A lot of stuff, I believe, ended up on the cutting room floor.
That might be. It didn't bother me though. I feel like
you're a big fan of the prison scene.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably remiss about the stuff they did cut out, if you know what I'm saying. No, but it's just I didn't need a lot of exposition. I felt like this prison. Yeah, why Harry, Walter, and Adam arrive the same day. They probably just threw him in the same cell together. This guy's well connected, so he's got these two stooges to run errands for him. I didn't need all that explained to me. I picked it up in kind of the visual language of it. And I did like, I don't know if this is what you're referring to with the editing, but there's a lot of scene changes in the beginning. We're going from one part of Massachusetts to New York to another part of Massachusetts and back to New York. And
right.
There's a lot of switching around going on. There's a big time jump at the end, which we can gather pretty much how that came about. I almost wonder if, because it initially was supposed to be called Harry and Walter. They changed it to Harry and Walter Go to New York. The way that Gould and Caan play this up, and the fact that Michael Caine's character is still, he's around at the end. I'm wondering if this was meant to be like a setup for a series. Like if this had done anything, if it was like Harry and Walter go to Boston again or Vegas. Well, Vegas wasn't around, but
that title change, interestingly enough, turns it from a leading man movie to an ensemble picture. Because just adding go to New York while they're doing something, and obviously somebody's going to be there. Yeah. So, but what did you think of the comic opera at the end?
I thought it was a lot of fun. I think
I did too.
Well, I will say,
made me laugh. That was the biggest laughs I had in the film.
I was laughing at the audacity and the one qualifier when I said this movie would be great if people discovered it today is the scene, the taboo scene of Walter playing the Nubian servant in the play, where he puts a bunch of like face paint on and like dust or powder or something, and then goes out as this black character and is kind of doing a voice for a little bit. That would probably require a trigger warning, but it didn't bother me so much because
it didn't bother me either.
It's because again, it's about context, right?
I'm very sensitive to blackface, but to me, it was just part of the chaos backstage, And when he comes out, it's maybe like smudged on his cheeks. It's not like full blackface.
By the end of it, it almost looks like he was just trying to paint himself a 5 o'clock shadow or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the context of the scene, but you're right. It would probably require a trigger warning.
Yeah, and it's also it's the context of the scene. It's also the context of when this movie is set. there was no consideration of political correctness. Blackface
Right.
was what
Absolutely.
you did in vaudeville.
That was
and
part of
entertainment.
vaudeville.
Yeah.
It really was. Not to forgive or forget, but it just was.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because I think about some of the aspects of my dad's attitudes toward things, and a lot of times people like to say, in context of that they were a man or a woman of their times. Therefore, we should forgive that attitude that they have now. But I always argue that somebody lives in the present. They don't live in the past.
Mm-hmm.
If things have evolved in the present to a point where you can't do certain things that you could do when you were a kid or somebody who was younger, you need to get with the program, or people are going to start, shunning.
Well, I don't think you necessarily need to forgive, but just to understand,
Sure.
because there is such a thing as people are a product of their time, and you can never tell how history is going to look back on certain things. For example, it's probably not a big secret that the devices we're talking on, doing this very interview on, were, likely mined from, slave labor in other countries that we don't need to think about.
Right.
Now, in 30 years from now, if there's a big cultural shift and people look back and, they've evolved to completely earth-friendly, non-slave requiring materials to do this stuff on, they're going to look back at us and be like, how could you do this? You were having fun while these atrocities were going on.
Right.
It's not necessarily the same thing as blackface, but it's sort of in that same ballpark, because people are just people and they're trying to move within the norms of their society. There are a few revolutionaries, a few outside the box thinkers, but certainly not everyone is like that. Otherwise, thinking outside the box would be the norm, in which case it'd be a different box.
True that.
Yeah, I'm done soapboxing.
So if you were doing a 5-star on this, what would you give it? 5-star system.
I hold on to your rap. I'm going to give this a 4.
Yeah, I would vacillate. I'm going to give it a 3.5 because of the first half. But I mean, I like when an ending is strong. I usually have a lot of forgiveness for the first half of a film. And as you said, I was watching it late and I possibly wasn't tracking with it, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, 3.5 for me. And I was so happy after it was over that I've seen it, because it was just one of those titles that always intrigued me, always. Harry and Walter go to New York. Why are they going to New York? Well, I found out. Finally, after all these years, Ian, I found out why Harry and Walter are going to New York. Get out of my office.
And it was a pretty awesome reason to go to New York. This is what fascinates me. When you mentioned this to me, you suggested we do it.
Yeah.
I people will say, I never heard of that movie. I usually think it's an exaggeration. Like, it's more like I've never thought about it. I had literally never heard of this movie. I looked up the poster. I'm like, is that James Caan and Diane Keaton? What are they doing with Elliott Gould in like this comedy? What is going on here?
It was such strange casting on the top. When you get down to the character roles, all these people are around. But man, I agree, man. Hey, I've got a great suggestion for next month. Speaking of 70s movies.
Well, actually, it'll be later this month because we kind of missed the boat on May.
Right. It is June 1st. Hello. Summer of 42.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's the 50th anniversary of the film. It came out in 71. And it was at the time, a real groundbreaking sort of transition film about sexuality and telling it like it is, sort of thing. An offshoot. It's a hippie film set in the 1940s. So I've seen it, but I haven't seen it in a long time, and I'm very curious to watch it again now. Since I saw it was the 50th anniversary. So
it's yes, we will talk about it, because it will be the first time that I will have seen that movie all the way through.
Ah, there you go.
Oddly enough, this movie was on a lot when I was a kid on HBO, And I remember
Right.
always coming into it, no pun intended, at the exact like same stretch of the movie. And I'll tell you what that stretch is when we watch it, because I got to refresh myself on what the context was. But it was kind of like, you ever find yourself on a stretch where you look at the clock the same time every day for some reason?
Yes.
It's like whenever I'd be flipping channels and Summer of 42 was on, it'd be the exact same part.
The exact same moment.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny about that. The reason I came up with this film was I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and he brought up the scene, and I don't know if you saw the scene in your various viewings of it, but where he goes, I think he goes to buy a condom.
Yep.
And he gives all these random items to put in the bag, and one of them was a bottle of Old Harper, which was the whiskey. And we couldn't come up with the name of the whiskey, because they did a parody of it on The Simpsons, where Homer goes in to buy various things, and he wants a bottle of Old Harper.
I remember, if I'm remembering this correctly, it was the condoms that I recall from that scene, because I think the clerk asked him about it, and he's like, do you know what these are for, son? And he says, yeah, they're balloons, and you fill them with water and you let them go, or something like that. Yeah, he totally lies to get out of that situation. But yeah, that's the scene. And I think I might have seen the bit afterwards where they go on the double date, and there's a great shot of two characters looking down on two other characters, but we're seeing them kind of the worm's eye view, and we know what's going on. But yeah, we'll definitely talk about that next month, because I've always been curious about what the rest of that movie was about.
Well, there you go. And it's 50 years later.
Yeah.
And here we are. All right. Great one, man.
Yeah. Thank you for suggesting Harry and Walter Go to New York, and for talking to me about it. I know we generally both like it. My enthusiasm is kind of off the charts, but I'm glad we at least found things to appreciate, and also just to let people know about it. You can rent it on Amazon. There's also a Blu-ray you can buy, but it's definitely worth checking out as a historical artifact and an idea of, what movies can be. Like I said, it's not attached to anything. It's just an original idea. Even though it was trying to ride a crest of popularity, it is very much its own thing with its own voice.
And of course, get out of my office.
We will close it there, sir. Pat McDonald of HollywoodChicago.com. Thank you very much, sir. Check out his stuff in the description below, and we will see you probably in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, thanks, sir.
42. Blessings.
Blessings.